Here is Yoni Applebaum, a senior editor at The Atlantic.
Is this the beginning of the end of American racism? That's the central question posed in a recent Atlantic article written by our next guest. It's my pleasure to welcome my friend and colleague, Atlantic contributor and the director of the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research, Dr. Ibram Kendi. Ibram, in that article, you single out an unlikely hero for praise. You say that perhaps no American president has convinced more Americans of the reality of racism than Donald Trump. Could you expand on that a little and say why you would credit Donald Trump like that?
Well, first, when you look at the polling data, you see this massive increase in the number of Americans who are recognizing racism as a problem during the political career of Donald Trump. So you saw this massive jump between 2015 and 2016, and another significant jump from 2016 to today. And I think what is fascinating about Trump is not only has he supported racist policies like locking up Latinx children in cages, not only has he expressed racist ideas, describing nations in Africa and even Latin America as S-holes, but he's also denied that he was being racist. And that denial of his own racism, sort of in conversation with the racism itself, has really put up a mirror to the denial that everyday Americans have. So when they themselves say, "I'm not racist," they also are knowing that Donald Trump is saying, "I'm not racist."
Now, you've looked at how Americans think about race, looking at polling questions, one that you call an anti-racist index, where pollsters ask the American public, do you think that Black Americans are primarily disadvantaged but because of racism and discrimination? And the way that Americans have answered that question over time has evolved, and perhaps never more rapidly than the last few years. Why do you think that's changing?
I think in addition to the persisting denials of Donald Trump, combined with what people view as his naked sort of racism, I think we're in the midst of a time where you have all sorts of writers, from journalists to scholars, who are directly challenging and exposing racism. You have organizations who are doing so. You have a Black Lives Matter movement that's really making people aware of racism, and that are saying collectively that the problem isn't people of color when there's racial disparities and inequities. The problem is racism.
Now, this is sort of an odd case for optimism about this moment. Many Americans can see the protests in the streets, are perhaps newly aware of some of the problems, from police violence to discrimination in the workplace. And it feels, I think, to many Americans like an extremely pessimistic moment, a moment when harsh realities have been thrown into the spotlight. You're suggesting here instead that the very recognition of those problems represents progress. But you also give us a warning that we may be tempted to think that if Donald Trump has called our attention to these problems, that simply removing Donald Trump from office will cure them.
Exactly, and if we truly do believe, if as many Americans seem to believe, that racism is embodied in Donald Trump, not embodied in the policies of our communities and institutions that are leading to disparities, but if people believe that racism is embodied in Donald Trump, then people believe that once they rid the White House of Donald Trump, in their mind, they're imagining that they've rid the country of racism. So yet again, they will declare a post-racial society, and yet again, they will in fact be living in a fantasy land where indeed racism is continuing to advance. And then we would be laying the groundwork for the reemergence of another Donald Trump.
You know, the president lately has been labeling what he calls critical race theory unpatriotic. He's suggesting that scholars who do the work frankly, that you do, are giving Americans a narrative of America as a flawed and perhaps irredeemable country. What would you say to the president and to others who suggest that the history you write is unpatriotic?
Well, I would first and foremost say that the job of the historian is not to be concerned about whether presidents or politicians or even the American people consider truth-telling to be patriotic or not. The job of the historian is to tell the truth. The job of the historian is to present the evidence. And if that evidence causes the American people to love their country and feel great about their country, or hate their country, or think their country is irredeemable, then that's up to the people. It's our job to present the evidence. And it seems as if Donald Trump wants a history that not grounded in truth, but that compels Americans to love their country. And to me, that should not be the basis of our educational system. Our educational system, certainly our history, should be based on what actually happened or what is actually happening.
So if Americans now see their country more clearly, if they have a better understanding of that history, and it's leading them to take the problem of racism and its persistence more seriously, is there a path forward? How can Americans, ordinary Americans, take that understanding of the past and translate it into a better future?
Well, I mean, if Americans look out at the racial disparities in our country and recognize that they are the result of past and even lingering racist policies, and those policies and structures and systems become the problem, then the path forward becomes pretty plain. We need to rid the country of those racist policies, structures, and systems, and replace them with more anti-racist policies and structures and systems. In other words, it's not enough to just be aware. We must then take action so that we can transform this country.
You're using two words here, racist and anti-racist, as a set of oppositional extremes. I can be moral, immoral, or amoral. But you've written that there is no middle ground between being racist and anti-racist. Why do you think that's so?
So when it comes to race, there's racial equality and there's racial inequality. There's no in between. There's racial hierarchy and there's racial notions of racial equality. There's no in between hierarchy and equality. There's racial equity and there's racial inequity. There's racial justice and there's racial injustice. And when we look at our ideas, they're either connoting that certain racial groups are better or worse than others, or they're connoting that the racial groups are equals. When we look at our policies, they're either leading to equity between racial groups or inequity between racial groups. If it was up to me, there would be 6 ways of understanding this. But at the end of the day, I can't find anything between equity and inequity. And those who are championing notions of racial equality and pushing for equity in our society are being anti-racist. And those who are championing racial hierarchy and pushing policies that are maintaining racial inequity are being racist.
So if you take the energy that the anti-racist movement has found in 2020 and you map it forward, it may carry through the fall election, but you're suggesting it's going to have to carry far beyond that to start to achieve the kind of anti-racist society you'd like to see Americans build. What kind of advice do you have for ordinary people, people who aren't government officials? They may not be policymakers, but they'd like to build a better and more equitable country.
Sure. I think everyday people need to, and that's even someone like me. I'm not a government official, but what we need to be doing is discerning between that policymaker who is promoting a policy that will reduce racial inequity and who's promoting a policy that can eliminate racial inequity. And we need to be supporting those policymakers and those policies that have the potential to eliminate racial inequity, in the way that abolitionists some time ago were advocating for immediate emancipation of all people enslaved. We need to be demanding immediate equality. And there are policies that are out there that can eliminate poverty, and certainly Black and brown disproportionate poverty. There are policies out there that could presumably eliminate the growing racial wealth gap, eliminate the ability to voter suppress, eliminate the police violence. And that's how we need to be thinking, because that's how we can transform this country. If we start with the question, what can eliminate racial inequity, then we'll get answers.
So for Americans, it can be a matter of demanding better policies from their policymakers. Are there things that they can do at an interpersonal level as well, or is this mostly about pushing for government reform?
I think at an interpersonal level, each and every one of us need to make sure that we are striving to be anti-racist, meaning we are seeing the racial groups as equals, which then allows us to protect ourselves from those who are trafficking ideas that are dividing us, that are saying that certain things are wrong with Black people or Native people, and that those people are animals, and I'll protect you from those animals. And, we need to be recognizing that those types of racist ideas deflect us from what the true problem is, and what truly is dividing us, and what's truly preventing us as an American community from coming together, what's preventing us as a human community, from coming together. Because what's going to bring people together is equality, is equity, is justice, and that's where we need to be focused.
What are you most worried about at this moment?
I'm most worried that the critical mass of aware people will think that is enough, that it's enough to recognize that racism is a serious problem, and that many of those folks will not be willing to support the big solutions that can eliminate racism, and they will thereby only support gradual policies that will gradually reduce some forms of inequity. But then as a result, when the politics of this country change and new policies are put in place, those sort of successes from those gradual declines will be eradicated. And then we'll be back to square one.
Let me flip that around. What gives you the most hope right now?
Oh, the resistance. People demonstrating last night when they heard that Breonna Taylor wasn't going to receive justice. People demonstrating today, people outraged when they see racism, in full view. And people thinking about how can they transform power, in policy. Resistance always gives me hope.
Thank you, Dr. Kendi, for talking with us today.
Thank you, Yoni.